In this episode of the Omega Podcast, we have a business management expert, Jim Hickel, discussing cost controls, executive mismanagement, skills that are layoff-proof, and building corporate morale. Reimagine the possible.
Welcome to the Omega Expert Chat with Jim Hickel, who is an independent management consultant with MBO Partners. With previous consulting experience at Booz, Allen Hamilton, and Accenture, he is also an adjunct professor of business at both American University and the University of Maryland Global Campus. He is also an author of the Cost-Effective Organization, How to Create It and How to Maintain It, which is having its 30th anniversary of its release date this year. He is also an advisor at Omega Consulting. It's great to have you on the podcast, Jim.
Well, thank you, Ken.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to our conversation on cost control, cost reduction strategies. And as we both know, within the last few months, we've seen a shaking within the business environment, especially with companies doing a lot of layoffs. This ongoing business outlook has been shaken due to the increasingly uncertain economic conditions. It seems like we're currently living in the age of layoffs. Almost every day we hear that companies are announcing major layoffs, especially within enterprise tech companies. Why do you think this is happening?
Oh, so and you mentioned that we're having the 30-year anniversary of my book. I'm in my 70th year personally, and these things are cyclical. Right, they come and go. I've been through 3 or 4 ages of layoffs in my day. They happen periodically. They tend to be the result of a couple of things. Often it's an economic crisis. I mean, the layoffs during the Great Recession of 2008 were just economic. They had nothing to do with business or nothing to do with poor management or little to do with poor management. But it was mostly the economic conditions where suddenly the rules changed and things that people counted on fell apart. So that's typically what happens, but more often, in my experience, it's a wholesale change in technology that happens. So I'm going to go back. What's happening now is very similar to me, to what happened in the late 80s and early 90s. So back then, people suddenly started getting desktop computers, these strange machines that could do a lot of things they couldn't do before. And businesses had to adjust to those. And businesses didn't really want to. People didn't want to start typing their own reports on their personal computers. They wanted secretaries to do it. So they didn't want to get rid of their secretaries. They didn't want to get rid of the people who were doing handheld spreadsheets. But they had to. They had to be effective. And they had to sometimes be dragged into it by the competition because they just couldn't compete if they didn't. To me, this latest round of layoffs is kind of the same thing. We're getting into an even newer age of technology with artificial intelligence and machine learning and even things like we're starting to get into driverless cars. And all of those things are going to change the nature of the workforce. And companies are being pulled into responding to that, whether they want to or not. And when you do that, it's not necessarily you're getting rid of people, but they have to change their skills in order to adapt to the new environment. So I believe that's what we're going through right now. It's just one of at least 2, if not more, transitions like this that we've had in the past.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of technological advancements that's changing the cycle and how companies are planning for the future, especially when it comes to budgeting processes. And they typically aren't designed to foresee or to realize that these types of technological advancements will impact foreseeing the future or foreseeing budgeting or planning within the next fiscal year. Why do you think that is causing this particular latest cycle? We talked about emerging tech, but there seems to be another component that perhaps we can highlight. Why do you think that is?
Well, yeah. So you mentioned that typical budgeting and financial processes in an organization are designed for a typical day or a typical month or a typical year. So designed to kind of run things appropriately. So you're spending pretty much what you used to spend and you're cutting back where possible, but generally also looking for new opportunities to spend. Those systems fail when you're suddenly hit with a crisis like this. And it can be a crisis where you have to really rethink your budget and really rethink what you're doing a lot of companies have financial processes in place for that, but most don't. It's just take the last year's budget and add to it, subtract to it maybe a little bit, and really it calls for a wholesale rethinking of your budgeting process when changes like that happen. So yeah, I think you're exactly right, Keenan. Most companies don't have processes that regularly accommodate times when they have to cut costs considerably.
When companies lay people off, would you consider that to be a sign of mismanagement or lack of cost control? Because we mentioned that there's emerging tech, obviously, but there's obviously many other factors that come into play when it comes to companies laying people off. Sometimes there is obviously economic downturns. There is perhaps a new department within the organization that they're looking to reallocate the funds toward. But is that part of the reason for laying people off? I mean, there's a slew of different areas that companies are looking into, investing more into tech, maybe investing more into their existing employee workforce that's staying after they lay people off.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think a lot of companies that lay people off are actually great managers. And what they've done is in the past few years, the economy's been great. So they've been investing in new things. They've been investing in these new technologies. They've been investing in, how driverless cars and drones are going to improve the delivery system in their companies, and they invest money in exploring different ways of taking advantage of this technology. So when a downturn hits like this, they're the ones that are most affected because they've hired a lot of people to be speculative and forward looking, and now they've got to belt tighten and control things. So that can be. Yes. I mean, to answer your question, yes, it can be a sign of mismanagement when you have to lay off a lot of people, but very often it can be it's almost that you're being punished for being too forward thinking and you hired too many people to think about the future and what your next steps are. So no, I don't think it's mismanagement at all. It can be a combination of factors that lead to these layoffs.
Yeah, and I remember looking at the news sites on insider.com, Business Insider specifically, and they were talking a lot about how there was a lot of opportunities where companies were hiring, right? Where they were looking and trying to retain the talent because they received a lot of PPP loans or, investment from the government or from different parties in order to keep their businesses going throughout the pandemic. So they had a large influx of cash very quickly, and how they were able to leverage those funds, I believe, could have been mismanaged there because you got maybe over $2 million, $100 million from the government in order to invest into your organizations. We're talking about large enterprise companies right now. And being able to lay off people, 2 or 3 years down the line, I would consider that to be mismanagement, knowing that you weren't sure how this was going to play a key role in sustaining that talent that you just hired 3 or 4 years ago. But across the board cost cutting, would you consider that to be a good idea?
So yeah, let me tell you one of my earliest business stories ever. We're going back decades on this one. My very first job, I came on board to an organization, and within a few months after I joined, I'm just a new employee, young guy. And just as I started working there for a few months, suddenly they had a little bit of belt tightening, nothing major, but they had a lower budget than they expected, less revenue. They had to cut back a little bit. So they decided they're going to cut back on travel. And they pretty much close to, not quite eliminated business travel, but cut it down to the bone. And so it didn't affect me. I was a young employee. I wasn't going anywhere. But they went through this for several months, almost a year, I guess. And then they finally recovered. Everything was good. That helped. It was sort of across the board. Everybody, no matter who they were, no travel. So about a year after that, when things were back to normal, my boss started sending me on trips. Here I am, a young guy. They're sending me on business trips, business paid trips to San Francisco, to Los Angeles, to St. Louis. I'm going to places that I just thought it was great. I was young. I didn't have a family. And I thought at that time, I think we all grow older and wiser. At that time, I thought business travel was magical. You got to go see places and interact and get things done. And it was terrific. But it was a little odd to me that I was being sent to all these places. So I went to my boss and said, why am I doing all this business travel? I could do some of this stuff by phone. I could handle it different ways. And he said, I'm doing it so that he basically admitted I'm padding my travel budget. So the next time they do this travel cut thing again, I'm going to cut your travel budget and I'll have enough money to do the travel that I absolutely need to do my job, because I didn't have that for the past year, and it's made things horrible, and I've spent a lot of time trying to get back on track. So to answer your question about across the board cost cuts, they don't work. They work over the short term. If you tell everyone in the organization, okay, cut your budget by 10%, everybody will cut them by 10%, and you'll have a 10% lower budget, and you'll get through the crisis. But what you're teaching people over the long term is pad your budgets. Because when you do those across the board budgets, you punished the people who were tight with budgets and had nothing but muscle in their budgets, and you rewarded the people who had fat in their budgets, because all they did was cut 10% of their fat out, and they met the target. So now you've got all your managers putting fat in their budgets in anticipation of future across the board cost cuts. So you've solved, it's like a lot of business decisions. You've solved the problem for the short term, but you've kicked the can down the road for later. So across the board cost cuts just don't work.
Yeah, I'm glad that you specialize in that area, because I also agree. It encourages managers to pad their budgets in the future, and it's not always the most satisfactory way in the long scheme, right? In the long term. Yeah. But as we both know, thousands and thousands of employees in the last few months from major companies have been laid off due to the economic uncertainties. How can we avoid low morale when we're laying off employees? As you know, having thousands of your colleagues removed due to economic downturns, it definitely lowers the morale, and in some areas decreases productivity within the organization, because you're working and you don't even know if you might be next. So how can companies maybe work on that morale to encourage their employees to continue working and being productive, but also being able to keep that culture of inclusivity and being able to help support those that are still existing within these organizations?
Yeah. So your question is essentially, how can you avoid low morale during a time of layoffs? And the answer is you can't. You're going to have low morale when you do that. That's why you want to avoid layoffs, because morale gets horrible. So we had a client a few years ago who we were doing work for them, and everybody in the company was referring to Black Monday. And it was apparently some major traumatic event in the organization. And this was an organization of like 1,000 or 2,000 people. And so we finally asked somebody, what's Black Monday? Why is everybody so traumatized by Black Monday? And they said, there was massive layoffs in this organization about 3 years ago. It was on a Monday, they announced them. And it was horrifying. It had a tremendous negative effect on morale. And to this day, everybody remembers it as Black Monday. And this was like 2 or 3 years ago. So we dived into it a little more. And this was a company of like 1,000 to 2,000 people. 3 people were laid off on Black Monday. 3. And 3 years later, people were talking about Black Monday as this tremendously traumatic event. So, if that was less than a 3% layoff rate, if it had that kind of traumatic event at that organization, you can imagine when you actually lay off 10%, 20%, what a horrible impact that is on morale. So the answer is you can't prevent low morale. You got to recognize there's going to be low morale during layoff. It's like grief. It's like bereavement. You've got to give people time to grieve. You've got to give people time to bereave. Their friends are going. Years ago, we did a layoff of a large company that was literally doing like a 25% layoff. This was dramatic. And so they hired us to come in and figure out what are the positions, what are the activities you can cut, what are the positions you can eliminate. And of course, we went into the president of the company, and we said, here's the results. You can lay off 25% of staff. Here, it looks like these are the positions you can redesign work and get rid of work, and you can eliminate these positions. And he looked at the list of positions, and literally tears formed his eye. I thought I was going to see a tear fall down his cheek. And he said, I started at this company with some of these people. We went to orientation together 20 years ago. And they're not going to have a job by the time we're done with this. It was traumatic for the president of the company to do this. So it's very difficult to avoid trauma. You just got to give people time to grieve, and then you've got to focus on the people who remain. And that's when you give them the incentives and kind of redirect them to what are the skills they need to be successful in the future so they can avoid that happening as the company goes forward.
Yeah, and as you touch upon those skills, what skills would be fairly layoff proof in the future? I mean, you just saw your colleague, your buddy that you've been working with for 5, 10+ years get laid off, and now you're thinking, am I next? How do certain individuals, especially in this uncertain time with technology coming in some instances replacing employees, what would you consider to be skills that people should be investing into now in order to be layoff proof?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you two categories of answers. The first category is what skills are big now and look likely they're going to be big in the future. All right. And there's sort of things like data analytics, there's artificial intelligence, there's machine learning, the financial technology, fintech, some of the work that's being done in that area. I really think, despite right now, we're taping this in February 2023. Cryptocurrency is in a bit of a downturn right now, but I think that's temporary. I think there's a future in cryptocurrency. So there's a lot of areas that I think nothing is recession proof, nothing is layoff proof. But I think those are pretty strong. So you look at the things that are in demand today and figure they're going to be in demand for a while. But then there's a second category, and it's more difficult. And that's what are we low in skills now? Where are the skill gaps right now? Because everybody's flocking to the high demand things. What are the low demand things that we're not filling that need to be filled in the future? So, and the answer is different for everybody. I don't have the definitive answer. I'm going to give you my answer. I'm not sure it's the right one. I'm pretty sure it's the right one, but there's other ones that I don't know about. So I'm going to guess that the area that has the greatest skill gap right now and is going to need to be filled in the future is in communications. And by communications, I don't mean telecommunications. I mean actually communicating with each other. You mentioned before that I teach at a couple of universities. And I have to say, I'm enormously impressed with my students. These are people in maybe their early to mid 20s. And I am thoroughly confident that the world is in good hands with these students. Brilliant people. They struggle with communications. They struggle with writing. And I don't mean they can't put together a literate sentence, because they can. They can put together a literate sentence. They struggle with putting together a compelling sentence. And it's as if they, I hate to say this, like everybody else, I blame the internet. The internet doesn't reward people for persuading other people. It rewards them for blasting other people for not agreeing with them. And that's just not the way to get along in business. It's not the way to get ahead. And I'm impressed by the fact that I teach in a strategic communications program at the University of Maryland Global Campus. And I'm impressed with how many students have joined that program because they've looked around and seen what communications look like in their organizations and other organizations and with their colleagues. And they've said, I want to be part of the vanguard that improves this. Because the communications are, in terms of trying to persuade other people, that skill is getting lost. So, again, from my narrow perspective, if you ask me what the kind of the ghost skill, not the one that everybody knows about, but the one that few people are talking about, but is going to be critical in the future, to me, it's that kind of communications, just the art of persuasive writing and speaking.
Yeah, I would have to second that as well. Soft skills will be the future. Obviously, with artificial intelligence, we talked a little bit about ChatGPT before within the Omega newsletter, but those specific skills that when it comes to communicating with your colleagues, being able to audit a bot, right? Being able to audit the work of your bots that you are working alongside with that might be doing specific writing for you, right? For leveraging technology like ChatGPT, for instance, you still need to go through that in order to make sure that it's free from error, especially when it comes to grammatical sentence structures. But what can companies that are reducing staff now do, right, to avoid layoffs and cost reduction in the future? Because they've already done it once. And for many, it might become, like you mentioned earlier, like a Black Monday, where every year it comes around and everyone's like grasping their coffee cups to not know if they're the next ones, or if they're going to be laid off or maybe moved, continuing that uncertainty. And obviously that's developing a very unhealthy culture, because people are working and they have to constantly look over their shoulder to see, am I doing enough? And that's not fair to them. And, eventually they're just going to get burnt out and leading to lack of productivity. And I think it's just this ongoing cycle of unhealthy environments. But how can companies maybe build better control settings in order to avoid those types of cost reductions in the future, or maybe be aware of it maybe 5 years down the line?
Yeah. So we started out this podcast by saying that the financial processes that people currently use are generally pretty good in normal times, but they kind of fail when times are tight. So the processes that have to be built into an organization are, I personally think there's 4 steps. Number one, it's have a strategic plan. Know what your company wants to do. And that sounds, okay, simple. Yeah, of course, everybody has a strategic plan. No, they don't. I've been in a lot of companies. I've been a consultant for 30 years. Not everyone has a coherent strategic plan. And what I tell people is trying to cut costs and trying to control costs without a strategic plan is like trying to find the cheapest possible airfare without knowing where you want to go. It just can't be done. So you really have to have a sense of what you want to do, and then ask yourself. That's step number one. Step number two is what are you spending money on, and is it helping you achieve that plan? So you have to link your budget to your strategy. So you have sort of a programmatic budget approach where the line items in your budget link to what you're trying to accomplish in your strategy. Most budgets don't do that. Most budgets just have this general line that says wages and this general line that says inventory. And what you really need is an understanding of how much of those wages and how much of those inventory is going to what goal in your strategic plan. And you can get some real surprises out of that. Like you can say, hey, wait a minute, the least important goal in our strategic plan is getting the most amount of money devoted to it. Is that right? And that can help with this process. Then the third thing is develop some kind of a mechanism so that your managers and employees can continuously identify opportunities to reduce costs. And then step 4 is develop a rewards and communications incentive so that the people know that process exists and people are rewarded for finding out ways to reduce costs. And then just keep that process continuously going in your organization. That's tough. I compare it to weight control, like trying to lose weight. Which has been my lifelong struggle. So this is a passionate area for me. There's 2 things you have to do if you're overweight. Number 1, you have to lose the weight. Number 2, you have to keep it off. Losing the weight is actually the easy part. You have goals, you have targets, you reduce. It's the same with cost control, right? Or cost reduction. You have this many costs, you have to reduce it by 25%. What are the things you're going to do? I won't say it's easy, but there's milestones. You know how close you're getting, and it's a fairly constant. And there's a beginning and an end is the most important part of it. You start with a certain amount, you end with a certain amount, you aim toward that goal. So there's an end point to it, right? So in a way, it's kind of okay. You've accomplished something. You feel great about yourself. To me, keeping the weight off has always been the struggle, right? Because you never have that end goal, and you never have a point where you go, oh, I've accomplished something. It's just something you continuously do to maintain the victory that you achieved in that first process. So that's the thing that I would really share with you is that you really need that process of continuously looking at costs and comparing them to what you're trying to accomplish. And very few companies have that mechanism over the long term.
Yes, and I love the fact in your book, The Cost-Effective Organization, you go through it very in detail to be able to create a diagram to kind of help every organization see, ask these very thought-provoking questions and be able to navigate how they can best prepare for the future, right? And that's kind of going back on them to have that self-awareness of their own organization to see, okay, this is what we can do now in order to better prepare for the future. But just to kind of take a step back for those that have been laid off, because obviously we see on LinkedIn that it's very traumatic. Many people are on the market trying to find new opportunities. What can people who have been laid off do to get back into the market? What are some specific tools or maybe some resources or maybe some just general advice that you have over the 30 plus years that you've been in the industry that they can be able to leverage to help them in their career trajectory?
Yeah, so let me start that answer by saying people today have an advantage they might probably not even realize, which is the internet. I remember back again during the layoffs of the 80s and 90s, if you lost, there was someone who I've now forgotten, someone who made a nice reputation for themselves, saying what to do if you're laid off. And this would be like in the 80s or 90s. And he said, the thing you want to do is send out at least 1,000 letters to different companies and tailor your resume to the company and just blanket the country with your resume, send them out by mail and make it a numbers game, because 99% of the people who get that letter are going to throw it away, but the 1% are going to read it and respond to it, and 1% of 1,000 is 10, and out of 10 you might get a job from one of them. That was job hunting back then. All right, so think about how much easier it is now. You can look at, in those days, if a company didn't publish their help wanted ad in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or something that everybody read, you couldn't get access to it. You just had to kind of guess what positions they had open. Now you can see, in internet boards, what kind of jobs they have open and what's available, and it's so much easier. So, but here's the thing that's the same: it's still a numbers game. So the more you get yourself out there and the more you publish yourself, the more people know that that you're looking for a job, the more likely you are to find one. So the first and foremost thing I would say is polish up your LinkedIn profile and make sure that's okay, because I'm not much of a social media guy, but I'm active on LinkedIn. Because people tend to, business people, I like LinkedIn because it's not about what you think, feel, or believe. It's about what you actually do. So put that out there. What is it you're actually doing? People respond to that in that forum. Recruiters are prevalent on LinkedIn. I said I'm in my 70s. I still get messages from recruiters, interested. So I think it's open for that. Also, let your personal network know when you're in the market. I recently did some. I had a colleague from a company I worked for who was looking for a job. She was getting laid off. She did almost a textbook model of using LinkedIn, Facebook. I mean, I saw her requests from several people. She was asking all her friends for help, just blatantly saying, here's my situation. I need your help to find jobs. Her networking got her a job pretty quickly because she was well liked, and she had maybe literally hundreds of people out there looking for friends and friends of friends and everyone else. So let people know what your situation is. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to say, hey, you know what? This is a period of layoffs. It's nothing personal. It doesn't mean you're a bad employee. People recognize that. So let people know, use your networks, including online. Obviously, tailor your resume for the position. Don't send out a blanket resume. Be sure to search job boards. I know that companies I work for, that if there's a job on the job board, they want somebody for it. So, send out resumes. Even the thing I want to tell you, even if you're only partially qualified for the job, apply for it. I've seen people say, oh, don't apply it for a job if you're not fully qualified for it. Those people do not know what they're talking about. What's on the job board, what they say on their job board they need is a wish list. And they may not find someone who fills their wish list. You may be as close as they come. So please, if you even closely apply, please do it. Please apply for the job. Think about that. And then the last thing, if you're laid off, this has worked for a lot of people. Leverage your old employer to find a new job, because you know what? If you're a good employee, you're a reasonably good employee, your employer feels bad about laying you off. So you know what? Take advantage of that. Find out if they can help you find a job, if they know some people somewhere. Find out if you can use some of the company resources to help you. They want you to find a new. They will feel better if they know you've landed on your feet somewhere. So use your old company as a resource to find out how to find another job somewhere. They want to help you celebrate your victory. They don't want to destroy you or make you a dead end at all. They want you to be successful. So those are some of the things that I've come up with in my work with this.
That's great. Jim, are there any final remarks that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think just to reinforce everything we said here, just recognize that avoiding layoffs it's an art and a science, and it's one that not many companies have developed substantially. And if you become cost conscious, and if you develop processes that continuously look at what your spending money on and whether it makes sense in relation to what you're trying to accomplish, you'll be far ahead of the competition and probably not be as affected by these periodic layoffs as your competition is.
Well, thank you, Jim, for being on the Omega Expert Chat.